Good morning, y'all.
Good morning.
Let's go ahead and pray, and then we'll get started. Lord, thank you so much just for this opportunity for this morning. Pray, God, that this would be beneficial, that this would be profitable for us as we explore just the testimony of Nebuchadnezzar in chapter 4. Again, may you be glorified, Lord, as we seek to make the meaning clear from the text and bring out observations that are important, that highlight your faithfulness to Daniel, just your character to Nebuchadnezzar, and that we are instructed as well by this historical account. What's in your son's name? Amen. Okay, so let's go ahead and jump into part 1 of chapter 4. Let's look at where we've been, and then we'll go on to the text here. So we are tracking a timeline from the time that Daniel and his companions are in captivity, all the way to essentially the end of Daniel's account. We have now kind of fast forwarded 20 years from 586 BC. That was from the last chapter where the image was built, and Daniel's companions were before this image, and they refused to bow to this image, and as a result, they were punished for it by being thrown into the fiery furnace, and of course, their life was preserved as a result of it. Again, we are fast forwarding 20 years into the future. A lot of time has passed, and I would say that this account was written in 563 to 562, right before he passed. Now, it's possible that this particular account that Nebuchadnezzar gives was between that 20 years, and he just decided to record it, probably around the time before he passed. And like I said, from our information from last week is that Nebuchadnezzar's perspective and worldview is established in the document known as the Enuma Elish, which means went above or went on high, right? We talked about this last week, spent a great deal of time looking at this particular document, some of the selections, the history of why this document was so important to those who lived in Babylon. And he was taught by his father, Nebuchadnezzar, the Enuma Elish, since he was taking the kingdom, right? Since when his father died, it was passed to him. And the Enuma Elish essentially is the Genesis story of Marduk, right? When he became king, that is Nebuchadnezzar, every year he completed the act of reading the Enuma Elish at the Babylonian New Year, and he had a fond admiration for this God who is acknowledged by him as the Lord of heaven and earth, right? It is in this light and the historical and cultural context of this information that we will examine the personal account of Nebuchadnezzar. Over the course of this chapter, what we're going to do is look at some of his statements, and then we're going to compare his statements to the Enuma Elish. That's why it was important for us to start off with that, because what he says here is pretty important, particularly when we consider his perspective. So we have two pertinent questions here for chapter 4. And of course, we'll have supplemental questions along the way. Why does King Nebuchadnezzar write in Daniel's book? If you remember from that lecture that I did before we actually entered into the text, and why is this historical account placed here in Daniel? We will seek to answer those when we get to the end of this chapter, as well as supplementary questions as well. Let's look at Daniel chapter 4, verse 1. And I'll go ahead and read it. Nebuchadnezzar, the king to all the peoples, nations, and men of every language that live on all the earth, may your peace abound. Nebuchadnezzar starts off giving an initial greeting to the readers of this historical account. I think that there's kind of several important things to notice here. They're not. This statement isn't really complex, but the observations here are pretty important, I think, to establish within this particular statement of Nebuchadnezzar. First of all, this account comes with kingly authority. This is important. If we were during the time of Nebuchadnezzar and he wrote something like this to us who were citizens or subjects of his kingdom, this is very important. This is something that we ought to take note of. Our king is speaking, right? And whatever he says is very important. This account begins with his name in Aramaic. This informs the reader that this account is coming directly from him. This isn't coming from someone else. I would even suspect that since Daniel is the main author of this text, that more than likely Daniel is the stenographer. So he's probably, dictating this to Daniel, and Daniel's writing this down, right? And since it is the voice essentially of Nebuchadnezzar, it's like Nebuchadnezzar is speaking himself to us, or at least to us who's reading it. May your peace abound. And of course, men of every language that live in all the earth. He is the ruler or the governing ruler of not just Babylon, but all of the other kingdoms that Babylon is influenced by. As I mentioned here. 2, this account does not just address the Babylonians, but the readers of all peoples, nations, and languages that live in all the earth. Again, once more, since Nebuchadnezzar at this time, again, is the King of Kings, this means that all people everywhere are to read this. This isn't just addressed to Babylon, but all of the other surrounding kingdoms too. Again, this underscores, again, a cross-reference here underscores that the explanation of the dream that Daniel gave him in chapter 2. Remember, it says in Daniel chapter 2, verses 37 to 38, again, you, O king, are the King of Kings, to whom the God of heaven has given the kingdom, the power, the strength, and the glory, and wherever the sons of men dwell, or the beasts of the field, or the birds of the sky, he's given them over your hand to rule them all. So, if we were subjects that were subjected to Babylon from another kingdom, his word carries over them too. So we're up in the north. We get this personal account from Nebuchadnezzar himself concerning this particular chapter, what he's getting ready to detail to us. Right? So it's not just to Babylon, but it's to the known world that Babylon influences at the time. Again, that's pretty incredible. In Daniel chapter 4, verse 2, he begins to describe his intent for his testimony. He says, "It seemed good to me to declare the signs and wonders which the Most High God has done for me." Let's take a look at a couple of words and then make some observations here. The word declare is kaval in the Aramaic text. 13 times this word occurs in the scriptures, and this word only occurs here in Daniel, between chapters 2 and 7. This word corresponds with the Hebrew word, which is translated to tell or to make known, right? To inform. Okay. This word is also written in the hafa'el stem, which is causative and force and active. So this is intentional on the part of Nebuchadnezzar to tell this particular account, this testimony here. It was also necessary, the way that this word is written. He went out of his way to talk about this, right? And I would say particularly he's close to his death here. And of course, you know, if that is true, he wrote this before his death. Usually the things that we say before we pass on are the most important things. This was something that was on his mind, that he had to tell not just Babylon, but all of the world that he governed over. The word signs, the Aramaic word signs, is the word "ah." This Aramaic word occurs 3 times in scriptures. In the Greek text, it only occurs here in the book of Daniel. And in all instances of this word, signs, "ah," it is used of the God of heaven alone, not Marduk, not Nebo. That's pretty incredible. We already have an admission here that the particular word that Nebuchadnezzar is using, he is attributing to the God of Daniel. He doesn't even say this about his own God. Again, this highlights, this word signs, highlights the calling card of a deity that has performed an amazing work for either a certain person or a group of people. So Nebuchadnezzar is basically detailing something that is unique, that Marduk doesn't get. He doesn't even attribute this sign or these signs to him. How about wonders? Tema is the Aramaic word. 4 times it occurs in the scriptures itself. And again, this word only occurs in the book of Daniel. And as, of course, this word is also only used of the God of heaven alone. Again, this underscores a work of a deity that leaves a group or people awestruck, dumbfounded, perplexed, amazed. Nebuchadnezzar attributes this word to, again, God, but not this Marduk, though. Some details about this image, or about the signs and wonders. Both Aramaic words are in the plural form, which is kind of interesting because there's only like one event that occurs here, right? Both Aramaic words have a definite article, the signs and the wonders. This is very specific. And both Aramaic words are written in what is known as the determined state. Let's recall the determined state here to jog our memories right quick. The determined state refers to either a single item or a collection of items of the same kind, right? When the word is used with the definite article. So both of these words are used. They're the same type or kind of thing. These signs and the wonders, these signs that this deity performed, and these things that leave Nebuchadnezzar awestruck, dumbfounded. Now that's kind of interesting because up to this point, God has done some pretty cool things with Nebuchadnezzar, right? I mean, we saw the dream that Daniel interpreted in chapter 2. We saw that God actually preserved the lives of Daniel's companions in chapter 3. Now we get to chapter 4, and he's awestruck when talking about this specifically. Here's a supplemental question that was in my mind as I was investigating this. Why didn't Nebuchadnezzar bring up the former signs? He could have said, look, 15 years ago, God did this. 10 years ago, God did this, right? But he just brings up one particular instance here. Why is that? He could have brought up the dream from chapter 2. I've had a dream from the God of heaven way back when that Daniel interpreted. Why is it just this one? Well, he tells us why it is in verse 2. It seemed good to me to declare the signs and wonders which the Most High God has done for me. This is personal. These signs and wonders to Nebuchadnezzar that he's going to bring up in this text here in chapter 4, these are personal to him. These impacted him personally. Let's take a look here. In Daniel chapter 2, yes, Nebuchadnezzar had a dream. And yes, Nebuchadnezzar was certainly talked about within that dream as Daniel described it to him. However, this was concerning the wise men. God was out to deal with the wise men, that they weren't wise at all, that they didn't have any information that they could give Nebuchadnezzar that was of any substance at all. How do I know this? Well, in Daniel chapter 2, verses 27 to 28, before Daniel gives his explanation of what the dream is, he says this: Daniel answered before the king and said, as for the mystery about which the king has inquired, neither wise men, nor conjurers, magicians, nor diviners or witches are able to declare it to the king. However, there is a God in heaven who reveals mysteries and has made known to the king Nebuchadnezzar what will take place in the latter days. This was your dream and the visions in your mind while you were on your bed. And he begins to explain to him what he saw and what it means. So this was in chapter 2, this was about the wise men, really. That your wise men aren't wise at all, right? They're kind of goofy, right? But that's okay. I'm going to tell you what this means. This was to show again that the gods of Babylon were fake. But Nebuchadnezzar didn't get it. Chapter 3 was about King Nebuchadnezzar concerning his rulers and the people of Babylon. The companions were used as an example to show that the God of heaven was the one who preserves life and delivers the companions from the flames. And all of the leadership was there. Okay? Everyone was there who saw this. How do I know this? In Daniel chapter 3, verses 2 to 3, we read this. Then Nebuchadnezzar, the king, sent word to assemble the satraps, the prefects, the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, the judges, the magistrates, and all the rulers of the provinces to come to the dedication of the image that Nebuchadnezzar the king had erected or established. Then the satraps, the prefects, the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, the judges, the magistrates, and all the rulers of the provinces were assembled for the dedication of the image that Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up. God challenged Marduk that day. They were supposed to worship the image. The companions did not. He threw them in the furnace. They were preserved. Wait, I thought those who went against Marduk were destroyed. Who didn't honor him were destroyed. That didn't happen. All of these two instances had to do with everyone else, including Nebuchadnezzar. But most of the focus was on everyone else. In this chapter, chapter 4, the act that God does concerns King Nebuchadnezzar personally. This affects him personally. Remember, in all the other chapters, God was, God's great. He's the revealer of mysteries. We'll take that. We'll put him in that position. He's good. Awesome. In chapter 3, oh yeah, he can deliver men from the flames, but he's not Marduk, though. In this chapter, God affects Nebuchadnezzar on a personal level. And Marduk doesn't respond to him. Matter of fact, we see this kind of underscored in verse 3 of chapter 4 of Daniel. Nebuchadnezzar details this. He writes, "How great are his signs, and how mighty are his wonders. His kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and his dominion from generation to generation." This is amazing. Nebuchadnezzar acknowledges his signs and his wonders. Same word here. And then mentions that his kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and his dominion is from generation to generation. Nebuchadnezzar's proclamation glorifies the works of the God of heaven and recognizes that his kingdom, Malku, this is the same word that's used in Daniel 2. And dominion or sovereignty is from generation to generation. This is an acknowledgement, essentially a throwback to what Daniel told Nebuchadnezzar in chapter 2. Verse 44 specifically. That in the days of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom which will never be destroyed, and that kingdom will not be left for another people. It will crush and put an end to these kingdoms, but it itself will endure forever. I don't think that Nebuchadnezzar, when Daniel said this the first time, I don't think he got this. Now he gets it. Why? Because what God did to Nebuchadnezzar in chapter 4 affected him on a personal level. The other two instances weren't very personal. He was still the king, still great, still reigning. It was great, right? Remember, Marduk is the one who gave him the kingdom. Yeah, if this God wants to come in and kind of help and influence, that's great, right? Now he gets it. Here's another statement to consider, too, another point. As we mentioned, as we read the Enuma Elish and read about Marduk's history, this statement that that Nebuchadnezzar makes flies in direct opposition to the titles and statements that concern Marduk. Do you remember? It's Marduk's kingdom. Marduk's kingdom, who Nebuchadnezzar got handed to. Remember, Nebuchadnezzar was installed by Marduk to be the sovereign ruler of Babylon and the known world at large, right? Matter of fact, it was Marduk who was acknowledged with these qualities. Let's go back to the Enuma Elish. In one such instance, the Enuma Elish mentions as follows. That is, Marduk conquered Tiamat. He troubled and ended her life. In the future of mankind, when the days grow old, may this be heard without ceasing. May it hold sway forever. since he, that is Marduk, created the realm of heaven and fashioned the firm earth. He is the Lord of the world. The Father Bel hath called his name, this title, which all the spirits of heaven proclaimed. So Marduk, again, according to Nebuchadnezzar, was the Lord of the world. He's the one that establishes and tears down kingdoms. He's the one that establishes kings and titles. He's the one that does this. And for Nebuchadnezzar to say that his kingdom endures forever, he basically is turning his back on Marduk. He's turning his back on the Enuma Elish. The Enuma Elish describes this: let a man rejoice in Marduk, the Lord of the gods, that it may cause his land to be fruitful, and that he himself may have prosperity. His words stand fast. His command is unaltered. The utterance of his mouth, no God ever canceled. Nebuchadnezzar is about to figure this out in this chapter, that ain't true. He gazed at his anger. He turned not his neck. When he is wrathful or wroth, no God can withstand his indignation. And God said, hold my beer. See, when we put this in context with history, you can't believe how amazing this is. He's writing this to everybody. This is the king of the known world who is writing this about the God of heaven. This was to be read and put in the annals of the kings as history for them to read and record and to know and be informed about. In Daniel chapter 4, verses 4 and 5, his personal account continues. He says, I, Nebuchadnezzar, was at ease in my house and flourishing in my palace. I saw a dream, and it made me fearful. And these fantasies, as I lay on my bed, and the visions in my mind kept alarming me. Nebuchadnezzar discusses that he was at ease. He begins to recount this particular what the signs and wonders that he's describing. What is he talking about? He begins to start to describe this. He says that he was at ease and flourishing or prosperous in his palace. Then Nebuchadnezzar once more observed the dream. Again, he lay on his bed, and it made him fearful. Let's take a look at the word fantasies here, because that sounds like he's making this up based upon the translation. Let's look at this Aramaic word. Hahor is the Aramaic word here for fantasies. This word occurs just here in the scriptures, and really it's associated with the Hebrew root word para, meaning to conceive or give birth. To conceive or give birth. Well, Nebuchadnezzar's not giving birth here. What does this mean exactly? I would translate this Aramaic word not necessarily fantasies, but thoughts or mental concepts. Okay? He's thinking about something. As Nebuchadnezzar is impacted by the dream he experiences. Have you ever had like a bad dream and you wake up and you're kind of like mulling over it through your mind, like, what in the world was that? Like, I have no idea where that came from, right? That's kind of what he's doing here. He's milling over this. As a matter of fact, we can kind of compare the dream in chapter 2 to the dream in chapter 4. In the dream in chapter 2, he was very much anxious and disturbed in himself. This was what God had used to get his attention, right? He was anxious, overwhelmed about what he saw. In this dream, he's unable to sleep. So he thinks about this, he has this, and he's kind of like, I don't know if I can do this. Like, man, I can't get myself settled. Right? So these start the same way, right? Again, God is trying to get Nebuchadnezzar's attention. And he does so by the way of these dreams. We read an account in verses 6 to 7 of chapter 4. He said, so I gave orders to bring into my presence all the wise men of Babylon. That's how we know he hasn't gotten it yet, because he's recalling what he did in the past, right? He's still calling these people so that they might make known to me the interpretation of the dream. Then the magicians, the conjurers, and the Chaldeans and the diviners came in, and I related the dream to them, but they could not make its interpretation known to me. No kidding. No kidding. This it's almost a repeat. We're doing the time warp again. It's almost like a same exact repeat of chapter 2. He calls them in, and this time he tells them what the dream is, and they can't figure it out. Nebuchadnezzar sends word to summon the wise men of Babylon together, and this time he related, that is Amar, spoke to all of them the dream he had. So this time he tells them. In chapter 2, he said, no, I'm not going to tell you. You need to tell me what I had and what it means. This time he tells them all of the details, and they still go, we can't tell you. What good are you then? Right? What good are you? You had a tougher challenge in chapter 2, right? Now I'm just going to tell you everything, and you're still kind of like, have you asked him? Right? Let's take a look at this word Chaldeans. I have not made this word clear, but I want to make it clear here. The word Chaldeans is the word Kazahi. It occurs 13 times in the scriptures, and it only occurs here in the book of Daniel. Now, this word corresponds, this word is used several different ways, okay? It could refer to those who live, the residents who live in Mesopotamia. They are called Chaldeans as a group, right? So it could be used as that, depending on the context. However, in this context, it's not talking about a group of individuals who live in Mesopotamia. This word Chaldeans, as it relates to the diviners, the witches, the conjurers, things like that, this concerns the head or the chief astrologers among all the wise men. So he basically, these are the cream of the crop, the creme de la creme, the ones who stand above the rest of all of the advisors of Nebuchadnezzar. Okay? They are part of the leadership of Nebuchadnezzar's court. And they work along with the diviners and magicians and conjurers. Well, again, this is kind of interesting. Even though Nebuchadnezzar tells his dream to these people who are before him that are supposed to tell him what this means, again, they cannot make the explanation known, just like chapter 2. Again, useless. So Nebuchadnezzar commanded them to explain the dream to him, and they still can't figure it out in chapter 2. And then Nebuchadnezzar explains the dream to them and asks them to tell them what it means, and they still can't do it. As we see here, the wise men can't explain the dream nor give an explanation to they can't detail it or explain it to him. And the wise man can't explain this dream to Nebuchadnezzar. Again, I find the setup to be amazing. I mean, it's very similar, parallels chapter 2 very much. Then we get Daniel chapter 4, verse 8. I would presume that Nebuchadnezzar gets kind of upset here and decides to bring in the chief prefect. Well, then if you guys can't tell me, well, then let's bring in Daniel then, right? Because he's got the God who's the revealer of mysteries. Obviously, you guys can't access him. So we'll just bring in Daniel, right? You guys are useless. It says, but finally, Daniel came in before me, whose name was Belshazzar, according to the name of my God, and in whom is a spirit of the holy gods. And I related to him. I related the dream to him. Again, as before, with the last dream, that is the diviners, the chief prefects, the Chaldeans and all of them, they cannot make out the explanation of the dream, but relates to Daniel, his dream, based upon one specific detail. Now, you recall that Belshazzar is Daniel's Babylonian name, right? Belshazzar, according to the name of my God, right? We saw this in Daniel chapter 1, where Daniel's name comes from two Hebrew words, El and Dan. Dan El, meaning God is my judge, right? Remember, his name was changed to Belshazzar, which comes from two words, protect the king, right? If you recall, Belshazzar, from various historical texts that we've looked at over the course of this discourse, Bel was associated with the god Marduk, which why he says, according to the name of my God, he's talking about Marduk in this sense. Okay. So he summons essentially Daniel, who bears the name of Marduk, which is ironic. And then he talks about how he has the spirit of the holy gods with him. That is Daniel. Let's take a look at this word holy here. Kadesh is the Aramaic word for holy. This Aramaic word, Kadesh, occurs 13 times in the scriptures. Whoops. It only occurs in the book of Daniel, again, between chapters 2 and 7. It is translated holy. It is even used to refer to the saints. I would take it in some of the dreams that we're going to look at here later on. This Hebrew word, or this word, this Aramaic word, is associated with the Hebrew word kadosh, again, which is translated the same way. Okay. What I find fascinating about this, this particular word, kadesh, this Aramaic word, is that the Babylonians were convinced that their gods were divine. That's clear. However, this adjective that Daniel used, or that Nebuchadnezzar uses, is only used of the God of Daniel and no one else. That is incredible, because Nebuchadnezzar at this point, I think, understands and knows that his wise men are useless. But yet, Nebuchadnezzar recognizes that there's something unique about the God of Daniel that is not found among any other gods that he knows, because he does not use Kadesh for even Marduk. I find that to be fascinating. This shows that the God of Daniel is set apart. He is unique from all other gods, including Marduk. That there's something about this God. And the God of and Daniel knows this God. And it seems that Daniel works, or Daniel works for this God, and God works for Daniel, it seems. Something unique that I can't figure out, according to Nebuchadnezzar's mind. We will stop here. Nebuchadnezzar, being troubled once more about a vision that he consults with his diviners and wise men, he comes up short once again. They can't answer his questions. They cannot explain what the dream is or what it means. However, due to the fact that Daniel has a unique, one-of-a-kind, separate, set apart God that is not Marduk, he trusts that Daniel will be able to give the explanation of the dream when all other wise men have failed. And that's where we will stop. Next week, we will go through the dream in detail, like we did in chapter 2. Okay. Let's pray, and we will close out here. What this passage, the sections that we looked at this morning, were very basic details, but those details mattered. It shows that Nebuchadnezzar is writing this or detailing this with his own voice, with his own words. We see that this was not just for Babylon, but this was for the entire world at that time that Babylon reigned over. And it shows again that you are a God who is unique, one of a kind, holy. It's just incredible. Thank you again so much for your word and reaffirming who you are to us as we went over your text in Daniel this morning. For it's in your son's name.